Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and this is my summer wrap up. Okay, so it's no secret that I hate the summertime. I hate the endless oppressive heat. I just hate summer. And it just feels like the doldrums of the year. And so, because of that, my productivity goes way down, and that includes my reading. And due to this seasonal depression, it was pretty clear that I was only reaching for some quick and easy page turners. So, a lot of romance and a lot of fantasy, easy fantasy, I would say. Even some of them were chunky, but still easy fantasy. Okay, so let's review some stats. From May through August, I read 19 books, and my ratings were 5 stars, 4 stars, 6 3 stars, 1 3.5 star, 1 2 star, and 1 1 star. That math doesn't add up, and I don't know which one I forgot, but you get the idea. Mostly 3 stars. The total page count was 7,518 pages, averaging about 61 pages per day. So overall, not good stats. My average should be around 100 to 150 pages per day, and these were not super high starring books, mostly hovering around 3 stars, but with some good ones up there. So let's take a look. So we're going to softball us right in with some contemporary romance, which it's no secret that I really don't love this genre, but I'm back on my bullshit, and these are kind of like junk food, and they're easy page turners, and it's an easy way for me to read and feel like I'm making some progress, and also kind of participate on when what BookTube is talking about. So I tried to pick some of the more talked about, more of the hyped books. So we'll see. And I started with Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. And this one was all over BookTube. Everyone was talking about it in the spring, and I wanted to get in on the hype. This is about the son of a US president who is a Latina woman, and he falls in love with the Prince of England. I gave it 3.5 stars, and the half was because it was written well. But I don't think I rounded it up to 4 stars on Goodreads. I don't think that matters, but 3.5 stars. So, like I said, everyone was talking about this book several months ago, so I wanted to jump in and see if this book was worth the hype. And maybe I need to stop doing that, because while this book had a really nice, tense enemies to lovers setup, the couple get together pretty early on. So the bulk of the book is actually dedicated to the political and social consequences of them coming out as a couple. And the thing is, I know I'm not the only person to think this, but I would really like to read a lot more gay, lesbian, and queer romances that aren't completely dedicated to the experiences of coming out. So, 3.5 stars. Perfectly average, but it had good writing. And then I read Shipped by Angie Hockman. In this contemporary romance, 2 rival coworkers who are up for the same promotion are sent together on a cruise. Is that right? That's not the right construction of that sentence. 2 coworkers up for the same promotion at a travel company are sent on a cruise together. It's a lot of prepositional phrases. I feel like I need to diagram that sentence. But you get the idea, right? Enemies to lovers romance. They're fighting for a promotion, and they work for a travel company, and they've never been on the company's cruise, so they're both sent on it together, and you can imagine what happens. Romance ensues. 3 stars. Because it does. So, while marketed as an enemies to lovers workplace rivalry romance, this book quickly establishes that the entire rivalry was based on a very simple misunderstanding. And then proceeds to paint the protagonist as this overly emotional, oblivious workaholic, and the male love interest as a perpetual knight in shining armor. The protagonist needs constant saving from her boss's cartoonish sexism, though the ending is both satisfying and absurd. So if you like really, really cheesy rom-coms, this book might be for you. And finally, in contemporary YA romance, I read The Secret Recipe for Moving On by Karen Bisher. In this book, Ellie has just been dumped by her boyfriend, which wouldn't be so bad if she wasn't stuck in home ec with him for the rest of the semester. Through baking and budgeting, Ellie develops new friendships and relationships and learns to stand on her own. 3 stars. A perfectly cute contemporary YA romance. Right down the plate, exactly what you'd expect. Ellie isn't the most sympathetic protagonist, but she does develop a personality by the end of the book. I also read 2 manga books this summer. The first was Syrup Volume 1, which is a collection of short stories about female and lesbian relationships. So I gave this 3 stars. While the different stories were unique, some of the storytelling was a bit awkward, and I'm hoping that some of the content got lost in translation because if not, there were some concerning themes in a few of the stories. I'll be honest, I didn't totally realize what I was picking up when I grabbed it at first. Now, however, I know what Yuri means, and I'll just be a little more discerning in the future. And then I read Snow White with the Red Hair, Volume 1. So I got this book because I absolutely adored the anime last year. It is a very cute fairy tale about a girl named Shirayuki who wants to become an herbalist for the prince in his kingdom. The manga is cute, but it really doesn't match the whimsicality of the anime, which was just really lighthearted and really charming, and it was a great escape during the pandemic. So the manga was cute, but to me the anime outshines it a little bit. I read one classic, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which has become one of my new favorite books of all time ever. In this book, a charming young man has a portrait painted of himself, and overcome with vanity, he sells his soul to remain eternally young and beautiful. Specifically, he asks that the portrait age instead of himself, and it does. But not only does it age, but it also shows the corruption of his soul throughout his lifetime. 5 stars, obviously. I love a good Faustian setup, but it was really well told, and the plot moved quickly, and it didn't have a lot of these very Dickensian, what is the adjective form of Dickens? Whatever. It doesn't do like Dickens does and just go on these long descriptions and diatribes where he's paid by the word. This was an efficiently told Faustian story, and I highly recommend it. It truly was a dream of form in days of thought. And the attributing tattoo will be put on my arm October 12th. And settle in because we're moving into fantasy romance, Captive of Wolves by Eva Chase. So Talia is a human, maybe, who has magical blood that prevents werewolves from turning during the full moon. So when she's a child, she is abducted by a group of horrible werewolves and is kept in a cage until she is conveniently 18, at which point she is freed. Except not. She is abducted from her abductors by a group of different werewolves who we are to believe is less horrible than the first because they do not regularly savagely abuse and torture her. And then over time she discovers that she may have magical powers. 2 stars. So because of her near lifelong imprisonment, she has the developmental agency of a child, which makes the entire book, which is a reverse harem premise, kind of uncomfortable. But I'm a glutton for punishment, so I started the sequel, Feral Blood. I started it because I wanted to see if anything happened after the initial setup from the entire first book. Did she escape? Did she make a decision? Any decision at all? Turns out, no. But she is consistently put in dangerous situations, and she is consistently in need of saving, coddling, and attention. Look, if you're gonna have a violent and fantastical reverse harem story, by all means. I'm not here to kink shame. I did pick up the book myself. But you can't have the main character, the protagonist, who is, by the way, the only female in the entire book and probably the series, as a constant whimpering victim to consistent gruesome violence. That would be many things, but mostly tiring. It's not fun to read a romance when the main character is a personalityless Cindy Lou Who through the entire thing. It's very weird, and yet these books are wildly popular. I can only assume that BookTube's obsession with this series is because they have yet to discover C.M. Stunek. So, Godspeed, my friends. And then things dramatically picked up in fantasy. First, I read the Kiss of Deception series. This series includes The Kiss of Deception, The Heart of Betrayal, and The Beauty of Darkness. I gave the first book 5 stars and the other 2 4 stars. The premise to this first book sounded super promising. Fleeing an arranged marriage, Princess Arabella takes up as a barmaid in a neighboring kingdom, and when that happens, 2 men are sent after her. One a deadly assassin from enemy lands, and the other the jilted prince. And through the entire book, we don't know which is which, or who is whom. When Leah discovers the identity of the assassin, she realizes she's part of a much, much larger plot of political intrigue. Now, obviously, that sounds super romancy, but it really wasn't. The book builds as it goes, and it does so at a normal pace instead of just ballooning in the middle. It goes from a simple potential romance plot into an exciting adventure, and then ultimately an epic journey. And the world building swells from simple plots of kingdoms and alliances into something much more terrifying, reaching back through history into ancient times and hidden prophecies. Leah's character growth is spectacular and heartbreaking, leading you from complex politics to devastating betrayal and building her steely resolve. This series is full of complex politics and pretty gruesome battles, and I was here for the violence. So 5 star for the first book, and then 4 and 4 for the 2 others. I also read Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley. Tamsin is a banished witch, and Wren is a source, a well of raw magic. When a dark curse settles over the kingdom, they realize that the only hope of breaking it lies within each other. I gave this one 4 stars. A great concept, vividly told. This has all the ingredients of exactly the type of fantasy epic quest that I really like. An epic quest, a badass witch, a dark curse, and a sapphic romance. But instead of the character development growing organically, it kind of comes in fits and starts. Wren, for example, is sort of this weepy, pathetic mouse through the whole book, and Tamsin is kind of a cutthroat bitch until the final page, which I personally found endearing, but I did want to give Wren a pacifier. The other thing that I didn't love was that the climax wrapped everything up so neatly with bows and happy endings that it almost... It lowered the stakes for the entire book and kind of took the wind out of the journey that they needed to get there. So, all my favorite things, 4 stars. And then I read Lore by Alexandra Bracken, which is another one that is wildly popular all over BookTube, Bookstagram, and BookTok. As punishment for past rebellion, Zeus creates the Aegon, a hunt against the gods to take place every 7 years. Families and hunters compete to kill the gods for the ultimate prize, receiving the gods' power and ascension, and restoring honor to their bloodline. Lore, the sole survivor of the House of Poseidon, has decided to remove herself from the hunt and further distance herself from the tragedies that it's caused her. But when a bleeding goddess shows up on her doorstep, Lore finds herself inextricably linked to the hunt, holding the key to the end of the Aegon itself. I gave this 5 stars. Bracken weaves an interesting web of Greek mythology, complex character arts, and intensely violent scenes. It was a bit difficult to sort out the mechanics of the Aegon at the beginning with all the different houses and gods and goddesses because I'm not super familiar with Greek mythology, but the story is gripping and it will keep you on the edge of your seat until the final page. And I read The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. It's no secret, or I've made no secret, of the fact that I love Trisha Levenseller. Daughter of the Pirate King is one of my favorite books. So naturally, I couldn't wait to read this one. Ruthless and ambitious Alexandra plans to woo the Shadow King and marry him, and then kill him and take his throne. 5 stars. What a ride. This book is fast-paced, charming, and a blessed standalone about 2 villains trying to out-scheme each other. Levenseller does not disappoint, delivering another witty, cutting, and independent protagonist. I'm giving it 5 stars because of the characters, the premise, and the incredible fun I had reading it, but I will say that the breakneck speed of the plot does leave you feeling a little winded in the first act, although it does smooth out throughout the book. I would have been okay with about 100 or 150 or even 200 more pages of this if it slowed the plot down and even just gave me 4 of the fantastic dialogue and chemistry between the characters. This is a true Slytherin romance. And finally, I read the first 2 of the Serpent and Dove series by Shelby Mahurin. In this fantasy, Louise LeBlanc is on the run from not only the Chasers, which are the official witch hunters of the church, but also from her family, a specific bloodthirsty faction of witches. In a quick move to save her own skin, Lou agrees to marry a chaser, in fact a captain, who reports directly to the Archbishop. Lou can only hope that by the time she is discovered, he chooses to honor his vows over his oath, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." I read this one last year, and for some reason I gave it 3.5 stars. And I cannot for the life of me figure out why I gave it 3.5 stars, other than the fact that I read it in May, which was right in the early stages of the pandemic and right as I was slipping into a pretty unforgiving clinical depression. But rereading it, I absolutely loved it, and I think that it deserved every single one of the 5 stars that I gave it. This is a pretty epic story about the battle between good and evil, black and white, right and wrong, and the Catholic Church and the concept of witchcraft, which is something I'm kind of passionate about. And Mahurin does a good job of treating it like the epic that it is, dealing with the hefty plot at hand while also opening up the doorway for the rest of the trilogy. The protagonist is very plucky and extremely likable, and the stoic, pious nature of the love interest is both endearing and also heartbreaking. I am looking forward to the 3rd installment, because then I read the sequel, Blood and Honey, and I did give that one 3.5 stars. So this is a pretty standard 2nd installment of a trilogy. A lot less plot, a lot more emotionally gripping, and a lot more psychological turmoil than necessarily plot development and movement. But it still dragged a lot. There was a lot of strategizing, a lot of traveling, and a lot of talking. And ultimately, this book just really feels like a connector bridge between the first book, which was very holistic in its own right, and what I'm hoping will be a similar experience with the 3rd book, Gods and Monsters. But this one is pretty heavy and emotionally draining, so have a snack after you eat it, or take a nap. So there you go, those were my summer reads. Some good books, some bad books, but mostly right down the plate with some 3 stars. So what about you? What did you read this summer? Leave me a comment below and tell me what your favorite thing was that you read this summer, and I'll add it to my TBR. And then, of course, tell me how you feel. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. And of course, there's always Instagram. But take care, and as always, happy reading.